Welcome to this feedback session on the Year 11 revision on the challenge of resource management. Now, first up for homework in November 2023. I'm going to go through some past paper questions with you and talk you through how I would go about answering these. I've got the mark scheme in front of me, which I will attach to this feedback, and hopefully that you can use that to review your own work and see how you've got on in relation to mine. For some of the questions, I'll model an answer. For others, I might bullet point or give you some pointers based on the mark scheme of how you can approach the questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time with my scrawl. I'm recording this live during the school day, so apologies in advance for any interruptions, but hopefully this will be a useful review of these questions. So question 1 asks us, how does increasing food miles lead to a larger carbon footprint? It's worth 2 marks, and for those 2 marks we need to do 2 things. The first is to show our basic understanding that food miles means we need more transport for that food, and then why that has an impact on the use of fuel, which causes more pollution. So for question 1, I'm just going to write one kind of developed sentence. So I'm going to say that food miles lead to larger carbon footprint as the need for food to be transported increases over longer distances, which means, and I'll move on to my second part of the answer, which means that there is greater emissions of CO2 when food is transported over a longer distance. So 2 mark questions. In the mark scheme I'd be given 4 lines to answer the question. I've fitted that in quite neatly. Food miles lead to a large carbon footprint as the need for food to be transported increases over long distances, which means there is a greater emissions of CO2 when food is transported over a longer distance. And essentially what I've got is 2 marks, 1 for the food being transported over long distances, and a second for that line with the greater emissions of CO2. So that's quite a nice, simple one. Question 2, on the other hand, is a little more developed. We're asked to what extent is it preferable to source food locally in the UK rather than import from abroad. And what I will say, by the way, is although these questions are about food rather than energy, for the question 3 on paper 2, you are expected to be able to answer these questions about the UK's food, water and energy. It's only in question 6 that you'd focus on energy and answer that question rather than attempting questions 4 and 5 on food and water. So you do need to have that broad understanding of food, water and energy and how they relate to the UK. So to what extent is it preferable to source food locally in the UK rather than import from abroad, for 6 marks, and we're getting our marks here for AO2, which is our understanding, and AO3, which is our application of our knowledge and understanding. And the mark scheme says that we need to demonstrate detailed understanding of the issues surrounding sourcing food locally, and we need to demonstrate sound application of knowledge in a reasoned way to make a judgment about whether to source food locally or import from abroad. That judgment comes in to the command. So the command word is to what extent. It's asking us to what extent is it preferable to source food locally. So how much do we agree? So we can obviously have our line from strongly agree over to strongly disagree. We could call that 100% agree, we could call that 0% agree, and along that line we've got a spectrum of viewpoints. And remember, you're allowed to be anywhere along that spectrum, it doesn't matter where you are along that spectrum, so long as you're not at 50%. You can't be bang in the middle. So you could be somewhere here, and you could say you partially agree. You could be over here and somewhat disagree. You could slightly disagree. You could mostly agree. So you can see that along that spectrum, we've got different points of view that we can include in our answer to show that we're working to that extent. Okay, so there's some words and phrases that you might wish to use to show that extent for AO3. So we need to think about food and why people might choose to buy locally produced food rather than food from abroad. So there's a few issues that you might wish to talk about, and each of these is going to get you credit for your understanding. So you might talk about waste, you might talk about cost, you might talk about supporting local businesses, so supporting local farmers. You might talk about quality of food as well, and you might talk about the knowledge of where that food comes from. So some of these have got pros and cons. So one issue might be cost, and that might be a problem because local food may be more expensive. So that's a negative thing. Okay, supporting local farmers is a positive thing. You're putting money into the local economy. So I know that if I go and buy, I go and do for Halloween, go and buy a pumpkin from a local farm, that money that I'm spending and doing that experience is then going back into the local economy, rather than it's actually fulfilling somebody's life, being able to spend their money in my community on other events and in other shops. Whereas if I were to go to the supermarket, that's just somebody, it's paying their shareholders, it's paying the people who live abstract to me, it's paying people who don't live in my community. So that money isn't going and being reinvested in the local economy. We might talk about quality. So local food may be higher quality. You might talk about the waste. There might be less food waste if you're buying direct from a supplier, because the supermarkets set very stringent targets. They set very stringent demands on the size, colour, shape of our fruit and vegetables. Whereas if you go to a farm shop, you might not care. You might see something that looks funny or looks interesting, and buy that instead. And the knowledge of where that food comes from, you might know the people, you might know the fields, or you might know the practices that they're doing. And that might fill you with some confidence to go, well, I bought this from the farm shop, and I spoke to the person that picked it, who told me that they don't use pesticides, or they told me that they don't put wax on their fruit, or they told me, there's lots of things that they could tell you that might then empower you to make that decision based on the knowledge. So there's a number of different arguments there, but many of these might also have the flip side. They might have the other side of things. And they're all things that you could include in your arguments to build up your answer to the question, and make that decision. You might decide that cost is a compelling thing. Local food is more expensive because wages in the UK are higher, therefore it's preferable to buy food from a supermarket where there's greater purchasing power to buy food from abroad and keep prices down. This is important to many people who may not be able to afford to buy food, and for whom it may be a luxury. On the other hand, less food waste is generated from buying from local producers, because there's not the demands of the supermarkets for a perfect item of fruit or vegetables. Overall, I mostly agree, partially agree, somewhat disagree, slightly disagree with the idea that it's preferable to source locally in the UK rather than import from abroad because of whatever reasons you've outlined. That would be how I would build my answer. So hopefully that gives you some ideas for the mark scheme, and obviously have a look at the mark scheme to support you in any case. Moving on to question 3, and we're directed to study the graph showing sources used to generate electricity in the UK 1985 to 2015. One thing springs out to me straight away, and it's probably because it is the thickest black line. Look at how gas appears in about 1990. We see gas appearing, and it becomes within less than 10 years, it becomes the biggest source of fuel in the UK, where it remains. Coal seems to be gradually declining, so we could say that. And we can see also renewables really accelerate kind of post 2005. So we can see renewables really almost exponentially increasing actually. Oil all but disappears, nuclear fluctuates but is kind of around the same level, kind of around 60 terawatt hours. So we've got a few different things we could say from this. So let's see what the question wants us to do. Use the graph to complete the paragraph, choose the correct answers from this list, and we're given the words fluctuating, remain steady, coal, oil, 2 dates. We've got 3 marks, so we've got to make a choice out of these words. Fluctuating and remain steady go together, coal and oil go together, and the 2 dates go together. So we've got to see what makes sense in the context of the graph. So the supply of electricity, something between 1985 and 2015. Well, from that, we can look at the graph and we can see that sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. The word for that is fluctuated. In 1985, something was the main source used to generate electricity, supplying over 60%. 1985, the highest one is coal. Coal is one of our options, so we can pop coal into there. By 2015, gas had become the number 1 source used to generate electricity, the rapid increase in the use of gas having started in, and that's where we've got our 2 options, 1992 and 1989. Now, I think that's pretty tricky. I said about 1990, but if we look at it, we're slightly closer to 1995 than we are to 1985, so I think we can say that the answer for that would be 1992. Quite why we're given such a long line for that, I have absolutely no idea. But that will give us our 3 marks. Give 2 reasons why the use of coal decreased between 1985 and 2015. Again, we've got 2 kind of marks available, so 2 kind of points that we can make. So we might say things like, we could talk about the price, we could talk about environmental impact, we could talk about public opinion, we could talk about more renewables, we could talk about coal running out, we could talk about international agreements. There's lots of things that we could talk about. So we could say something like the use of coal decreased due to it being a fossil fuel which is becoming increasingly short in supply. So we're running out of it. And then let's develop that and say this means the price of coal has risen to be less competitive than the alternatives. Competitive. So, again, looking at where I'm getting my marks there, we can say it's increasingly short in supply, it's a fossil fuel, we've got a mark for that, and then the price of coal has been risen and it's less competitive. That's where we get our 2nd mark. Again, there's some more ideas on the mark scheme. Have a look at those and see what matches your expectations. Question 4 asks us one way in which energy security might affect the quality of life of people. So again, we've got the same kind of rubric as we've just seen for question 3 and indeed for question 1. 4 marks where we're getting our first mark for the main idea and our second mark for extending that. So energy insecurity might affect quality of life because people don't have enough energy at home, so they might be unhealthy because they're catching illnesses. It could be because they're not cooking food. It could be because there's an impact on the farm or industry of accessing food. It could be to do with transport difficulties, or it could lead to civil conflict. So we're asked for one way, so we've got to be careful we don't do too many things here. But let's use the question words again to start a question. So energy insecurity might affect people's quality of life because my pen's just run out. I did tell you this was a live session. Because they may not have sufficient energy to heat their homes. This may result in them developing long-term health complications such as exposure to mould. And we know that is a problem with, it's been in the news with some rental properties in the UK and things like that as well. It's not just limited to poorer countries. So may not have sufficient energy to heat their homes. There's our first point. This may result in them developing those long-term conditions. That is our second idea, and that builds up to give us our full set of marks. Moving on to our final question then. And question 5 asks us to use an example that you've studied to examine how the extraction of a fossil fuel creates both advantages and disadvantages. Now, let's see if you spotted the slick cut where I refilled my pen. But we've got quite a nice question here. It's asking us about advantages and disadvantages. It's asking us to examine. It's not a command word we see that often, is examine. But it's essentially a kind of evaluate type question or a discuss type question where obviously we're looking at pros and cons. And there is no AO3. Okay, so we're only getting marks here at AO1 for our knowledge and AO2 for our understanding. We're not going to make a decision. Okay, so in that sense, this is most similar to that discuss command. Okay, where we've just got to set out the advantages. And what I would say is we've got basically 2 paragraphs to earn our 6 marks. So we could start it with one benefit of extracting fossil fuels is. And our second paragraph would be one problem associated with extracting fossil fuels is. And then we can build up our answer using those 2 sentence starters. So in terms of the benefits, we might talk about employment, we might talk about new industries, technology, innovation, and I guess you might talk perhaps there about your understanding of fracking as a technology. You might talk about access to energy, and you could talk about energy security. And if you think about the UK, then you could think about things like North Sea oil and gas. You could also talk about development of infrastructure. Make some links across to your understanding of the benefits of Shell operating in Nigeria, and the impact that they had in terms of building up not just the built infrastructure but also the infrastructure of education and so on. And finally, export of resources, which of course leads to economic growth. So there's lots and lots of benefits to extracting fossil fuels, particularly for countries in the poorer parts of the world, which may require some kind of impetus to help them grow. In terms of the disadvantages, we might talk about noise and disturbance. We might talk about some of the problems associated with, it's ugly, so does that have a negative impact on tourism in a place? Who wants to go to somewhere like Seal Sands at the mouth of the River Tees, which is full of chemical works and full of gas terminals and things like that? We've got traffic and congestion. We've got destruction of habitats. Look at the sheer volume of things that we could talk about here. Local conflict, health issues. You could talk about, finally, pollution. And again, you could talk about air pollution. You could talk about how that then impacts on air quality. You could talk about how that then impacts on climate change. Or you could talk about water pollution, and again, show that kind of holistic understanding of your geography with, again, Shell in the Niger Delta. I've got that at the forefront of my mind because I have just finished my lesson feeding back on the previous homework. But you see, we've got a whole bunch of things that we can use, and if we can pepper some examples through there with that knowledge, it does ask for a referenced example, a specific example of fossil fuel extraction. And that is where we would pick up our marks for that knowledge at AO1 by talking about things like fracking and being very, very specific in what we're talking about. The disadvantages, obviously the noise and disturbance from fracking. You might talk about the risk of earthquakes. You might talk about the fiery water. In Pennsylvania in the USA. With habitat destruction, you could talk about undersea problems. With local conflict, you might talk about places like Blackpool in the UK where there's been conflict over fracking, whether it should be used. There's lots of things that you can throw in there that we have looked at as specific examples to support your work. So you've got 2 pages there, and I'll just pop my my notes back under the visualizer so you can see everything that we've done today. And if you want obviously to take a screenshot or pause the video to take a look at those, then you can do. But I'll stop talking now and let you carry on with your day. I've done about 25 minutes there, which is probably equivalent to the amount that we go through in class. So I hope you found this useful, and obviously go back over your work and review the revision that you've done. If this highlights or identifies any gaps for you, then go back over those. But most of all, good luck with your mock exams. I hope they go successfully for you. Obviously we'll give you the feedback on those in the weeks to follow. Thanks very much for watching. Well done for doing your homework, and I will see you soon.